The peaceful hum of Lunaris 5 is shattered when an unknown enemy breaches the station's core systems, threatening to destroy everything the Federation has worked for. Captain Zane Wilder, the head of security, is tasked with protecting the station and its most important diplomat, Lady Corinna Thorvik. But as the chaos unfolds, Zane discovers something far more dangerous. Corinna herself may be unknowingly involved in the plot. As enemies close in and the station's security crumbles, Zane must race against time to stop the infiltration, before Corinna's fate seals the galaxy's downfall. Can he save the station and her, or has he already lost the battle? The clock is ticking, and the real enemy may be closer than he thinks. Don't miss the thrilling twist in this epic sci-fi saga. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. The hum of Lunaris V Station echoed through its vast halls as Captain Zane Wilder stood at attention, his sharp blue eyes scanning the busy docking bay. The space station, perched on the moon of Talaris Prime, was a hub of activity. Trade ships from across the galaxy came and went, and the station was always bustling with life. However, today felt different. A sharp tension lingered in the air, thick with anticipation. Zane's fingers clenched slightly around the edge of the control panel, his mind racing with thoughts of the diplomatic mission that was about to unfold. Zane was a man of discipline, accustomed to handling dangerous situations. As the head of station security, he had faced pirates, smugglers, and rogue traders with a calm that few could match. But today, his nerves were on edge. The arrival of Lady Corinna Thorvik, daughter of Lord Marius Thorvik, a powerful and wealthy industrialist, had been the subject of many whispered conversations around the station. While Zane was used to dignitaries, there was something about Lady Corinna's reputation that unsettled him. "She's a wild card," Zane muttered to Lieutenant Ella Parks, his second in command, who stood beside him. Ella glanced at him, sensing his unease. She knew Zane better than anyone, and she could tell that something about this mission was bothering him. "They say she's difficult to manage," Ella replied softly. "Her father has a reputation, and she's not far from it. Just don't let her get under your skin, Captain." Zane nodded but didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed on the massive ship now descending into the docking bay. The sleek, polished vessel was unmistakable. Only the richest could afford such a ship. It wasn't just any diplomatic envoy. It was a symbol of power. A symbol of Lady Corinna's wealth and status. As the ship's ramp descended, a small group of attendants emerged first, carrying large containers that probably contained personal luxuries. Then, stepping onto the ramp with a regal grace, came Lady Corinna Thorvik. Zane had seen a lot of dignitaries over the years, but none like her. She was tall, her presence commanding even in the sterile docking bay. Her red skin glowed under the harsh lights, a rich, polished hue that reminded Zane of polished copper. Her fiery hair cascaded down her back in intricate braids interwoven with precious metals that sparkled in the light. Her golden eyes swept over the welcoming committee with an obvious disdain, and she carried herself as though the station's existence was beneath her. Her outfit, a tight black ensemble with a plunging neckline and strategic cutouts, seemed more suited for a high-end nightclub than a diplomatic function. The sight of her left Zane momentarily speechless. He had been prepared for arrogance, but seeing it in person was something else. It wasn't just her looks, it was her attitude. She exuded confidence, but it bordered on condescension. Zane found himself tightening his jaw, but he forced himself to remain calm. It was his job to ensure her safety, no matter how insufferable she seemed. "Commander Wilder," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, but sharp as a blade. "I expected someone more impressive to greet me." Zane stepped forward, not allowing her words to rattle him. "Lady Corinna Thorvik," he said evenly, "on behalf of the Federation, welcome to Lunaris 5. I am Captain Zane Wilder, and I'll be personally overseeing your security during your stay." She didn't seem to pay much attention to his words. Instead, she circled him slowly, her gaze lingering on his muscular arms exposed by the sleeveless black armor he wore. Zane could feel her eyes on him, but he refused to be distracted. This was business, and he had a job to do. A human, she murmured, her voice dripping with disdain. How quaint. I expected something more suitable to my status. Zane remained stoic, refusing to show any sign of offense. I assure you my credentials are more than adequate, he replied, his tone unwavering. Lady Corinna's golden eyes flashed, and she gave a small, derisive laugh. We'll see about that, she said, snapping her fingers. Her entourage immediately began moving toward the exit. My quarters better be prepared exactly as I specified. Zane fell into step beside her, keeping his pace steady. Everything has been arranged according to your specifications, Lady Corinna, he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. I doubt that very much, she scoffed, her voice carrying an edge. Humans rarely understand the nuances of proper accommodation. Zane felt his patience beginning to fray, but he kept his expression unreadable. He had dealt with his fair share of entitled individuals, but something about Lady Corinna's arrogance grated on him in a way he hadn't expected. As they walked through the station's main corridor, Zane noticed the way the other personnel quickly moved aside, some openly staring at the alien aristocrat. Zane couldn't blame them. She was striking, both in appearance and demeanor. But he had a job to do, and he wasn't about to be distracted by her beauty or her airs. Corinna's voice broke through his thoughts. Your security protocols are laughable, she said, gesturing disdainfully to a scanning checkpoint. Any determined assassin could bypass these measures. Zane's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. He had heard this kind of criticism before, but he knew his team had implemented the best security systems available. Our systems are state-of-the-art, he said coolly, and I personally vetted every member of the security team. She stopped suddenly, turning to face him. Her golden eyes were sharp, assessing him as though he were a piece of meat. You don't understand who I am, do you? She asked, poking him firmly in the chest with one slender finger. I'm Lady Corinna Thorvik, daughter of Lord Marius. Thorvik. My bloodline traces back to the founding of the Galactic Concord. I could buy and sell this entire station with the equivalent of your pocket change. Zane's breath caught as her finger jabbed into his chest, testing his patience. His fingers twitched at his side, itching to grab her hand and remove it from his body. He took a slow breath, counting backward from 10 in his mind. I understand exactly who you are, Zane replied in a calm, measured voice, maintaining eye contact. And I assure you, Lady Corinna, I'm here to do my job, not to entertain. You. Corinna smirked at him, clearly enjoying the power she held over him. I was beginning to wonder if you were mute, she said, her lips curling into a smile. In a single fluid motion, Zane grabbed her wrist before she could poke him again. The move was swift and precise, and for a moment he thought he saw a flicker of surprise in her golden eyes. Without thinking, he pulled her hand toward his face, nipping at her fingers. Not hard enough to break skin, but enough to make a point. The corridor fell silent. Even the hum of the station system seemed to fade away. Corinna stared at him in shock, her mouth slightly agape. What did you just do? She whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. Zane held her gaze, not backing down. I showed you that even humans have boundaries, he said, a small smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. For several long moments they stood there, locked in a silent stare. Corinna's face was flushed with a mixture of outrage and something else he couldn't quite place. Zane, too, was taken aback by his own actions, but he didn't regret it. The silence was finally broken by the sound of Lady Corinna's calm voice. Commander Wilder, she said, her tone unnervingly measured. I believe we need to discuss the parameters of your service in private. Zane felt the weight of Corinna's gaze even after the moment had passed. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made him want to look away, but he refused. The power dynamic between them had shifted, if only slightly, and the realization made his blood run cold. His instinct had been to protect his boundaries, but he had underestimated how a single gesture could rattle the very foundation of their interaction. What had begun as a diplomatic courtesy now felt like a dangerous game, and neither of them was willing to back down. Corinna seemed to sense this too. The shock on her face melted into something more familiar, her usual aloofness. She lifted her chin slightly, her golden eyes narrowing as she studied him with a renewed sense of intrigue. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I've had my share of encounters with humans, but none have been quite like this." Her voice was smooth, almost purring, though there was an edge to it now. "Most of them bow and scrape. You, on the other hand, bite." Zane didn't reply. He knew she was pushing his buttons, testing him again, but he wasn't about to let her provoke him into another reaction. His jaw clenched as they continued down the corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cold metallic walls of the station. The station itself was designed to be a beacon of Federation power, a place where leaders and dignitaries from across the galaxy could come together. But today it felt like the very walls were closing in on him. Corinna had managed to make him feel smaller than he cared to admit, and the worst part was, he wasn't sure whether it was intentional or not. As they walked, Corinna's fingers brushed against his arm lightly, so casually that it almost went unnoticed. But Zane couldn't ignore the spark of electricity that shot through him at her touch. He forced himself to look ahead, his mind racing. The last thing he needed right now was to let her see how much her presence affected him. "You know," Corinna continued, her voice soft but deliberate, "I didn't expect this from you. Most men would have flinched by now or apologized. But you're different." Zane didn't respond, though his pulse quickened at her words. There was a certain power in Corinna's approach, an ability to make him feel like he was playing a game that he didn't fully understand. He had always prided himself on his ability to control a situation, but with her, the rules seemed to keep changing. She continued, her voice dropping lower, almost a whisper now. "I think you're starting to get it. This isn't just about you following orders. I want to know what makes you tick. Why you didn't flinch when I poked at your chest. Why you reacted when I pushed your boundaries. I find that fascinating." Zane felt his stomach twist. She was right. He had reacted. He had bitten back, and not just physically. He had taken the bait she had thrown at him, and he had shown her something he hadn't intended. He hadn't just established a boundary. He had made her see that he wasn't someone to be toyed with. But what did that mean for them now? Corinna stopped walking suddenly, turning to face him fully. The shift in her demeanor was instant, like flipping a switch. The playful glint in her eyes was gone, replaced with something more serious, even curious. "You think I'm arrogant, don't you?" she asked, tilting her head to the side as she studied him. "You think I'm just a spoiled princess with too much power and not enough humility?" Zane remained silent, unwilling to confirm or deny the accusation. It was true that her behavior had tested his patience, but he wasn't about to admit that to her. "I can see it in your eyes," she continued, her voice low. "You think I don't deserve respect, that I haven't earned it." Zane opened, his mouth to respond, but Corinna held up a hand to silence him. "Don't answer, I know what you're thinking. You think I'm just a title, a name, something to be conquered or avoided?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time she seemed to show a flicker of vulnerability beneath her arrogant exterior. "But the truth is, I haven't been respected in a long time. Not as a person, not as an individual. People see my father's name, my wealth, and they think that's who I am. But it's not." Zane was taken aback by her honesty. He had expected more mockery, more insults, but instead she was revealing something raw, something human. "I didn't ask to be born into this life," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I didn't ask for power, for riches. But here I'm expected to live up to this image that's been crafted for me. And it's exhausting, it's suffocating." Zane found himself staring at her, the woman who had been nothing but a challenge from the moment she set foot on Lunaris 5. But now, she wasn't just a diplomat or a rich heiress. She was a person, someone who had her own battles to fight, her own struggles. "I'm sorry," Zane said, his voice softer than he intended. "I didn't know." Corinna didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. And then, just as suddenly as the mood had shifted, she snapped back into her usual self. The wall of ice came down and the arrogance returned, though now it was tinged with something else. A hint of respect, perhaps. "Don't apologize," she said, her voice returning to its usual sharpness. "It doesn't change anything, but I suppose I can respect someone who can keep up with me. You're not as annoying as I thought." Zane couldn't help but chuckle at her words despite himself. For the first time, he found himself genuinely intrigued by Corinna Thorvik. She wasn't just the spoiled heiress he had initially pegged her as. She was something more, something complicated. And he wasn't sure if that made her more dangerous or just more interesting. Before he could say anything more, a loud beep interrupted the moment. His communicator buzzed urgently. "Commander Wilder," came the voice of Lieutenant Parks. "We have a situation. There's been a breach in Sector 7. Unauthorized access. You need to get down here now." Zane's heart dropped into his stomach. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The calm before the storm was over. He turned to Corinna, his face hardening into the mask of professionalism he had worn for years. "You need to stay here," he said firmly. "I'll handle this. Stay in your quarters until I return." Corinna, who had been about to respond with some retort, froze. The look in his eyes stopped her in her tracks. For the first time, she didn't argue. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Fine," she said quietly. "But don't take too long, Commander. I'm not a damsel in distress." Zane didn't respond. Instead, he turned sharply on his heel and headed for the exit, his mind racing with possibilities. This was more than a simple breach. Something big was happening on Lunaris 5, and it was only just beginning. As Zane stepped into the hallway, a small part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to face something much worse than an intruder, and this time Lady Corinna might not be the only one under threat. Zane's boots echoed through the station's corridor as he hurried toward the security hub. His communicator buzzed again, this time with a more urgent tone. "Lieutenant Parks," voice crackled through the speaker. "Commander, the breach is more serious than we anticipated. We've identified unauthorized access in Sector 7. Someone's tampered with the station's security system. They're inside the network." Zane's brow furrowed, his pulse quickening. A standard security breach was one thing, but an attack on the station's system, that was something entirely different. If someone had managed to bypass the Federation's defenses, it meant they had resources far beyond what they should have had. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was this an isolated attack, or were they just the first wave? "We've got multiple breaches across several sectors," Parks continued, her voice tense. "We've initiated lockdowns, but the intruders are bypassing our firewalls at an alarming rate. This could be the work of someone high up in the Federation. It's too clean." Zane's thoughts were already turning toward the diplomatic implications. If this was an inside job, it could have disastrous consequences for Lady Corinna's mission and by extension the entire Federation. He couldn't allow that. Not under his watch. "Get to the control center and lock everything down. I'll take care of the breach in Sector 7, Zane ordered, his voice firm. Without waiting for a response, Zane sped up, moving past startled crew members as they scrambled to secure their posts. His mind sharpened as the adrenaline kicked in. This wasn't just a security issue anymore. This was a full-blown threat to the station. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to orchestrate it, and he needed to get to the bottom of it fast. When Zane reached Sector 7, he immediately ordered the doors to be sealed. The corridors were eerily silent, a stark contrast to the usual hum of activity. The overhead lights flickered briefly before stabilizing, casting long shadows across the narrow hallways. He motioned to his team to fan out and search the area. "Check every vent, every access panel. If they've hacked the system, they could be hiding anywhere," Zane commanded. His team spread out, moving with practiced precision. He stayed close behind them, every sense heightened. It wasn't long before Zane found the first sign of trouble. A maintenance hatch had been forcibly opened, and the exposed wires were sparking in the dim light. It was clear that someone had been inside the station's critical systems, manipulating them. This wasn't an accident, Zane muttered to himself, kneeling beside the hatch. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. He turned to one of his officers. "Run a full diagnostic on this area. I want to know exactly what they've done to the systems. We're not just dealing with a security breach. This is an inside job. As his team worked quickly, Zane's thoughts returned to Corinna. He had no doubt that she was the target of this attack. If her father's enemies were behind the breach, then they had to be trying to undermine her efforts to destabilize the diplomatic missions he was leading. Zane felt a strange sense of responsibility weighing on him. He had been assigned to protect Corinna, but over the past few hours, he had begun to see her in a different light. She wasn't just the arrogant aristocrat he'd been told to monitor. She was capable, smart, and far more dangerous than he had initially thought. He had seen glimpses of a woman who could hold her own in the most dire of situations, and he had underestimated her. Before he could dwell on that thought, a loud crackling sound echoed through the hall. His team froze. The communication system had gone down, cutting off all contact with the control center. Zane's eyes narrowed. The attackers were inside, and they had just cut off their last line of defense. "Get to the backup systems." Zane barked. "Now!" His team sprinted toward the nearest control station, but as they moved through the corridors, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A small, unsettling shiver ran down his spine. He trusted his instincts, and right now they were telling him that something was very wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, without warning, a distant explosion shook the station. The ground beneath Zane's feet trembled as the sound reverberated through the walls. He grabbed his communicator, his heart racing. "Parks, what's happening? Report!" His lieutenant's voice was filled with panic. "It's bad, Commander. Someone's breached the central hub. We've got multiple intruders in the core systems. They're targeting the Federation's archives." Zane's mind raced. The archives? If the attackers gained access to that data, it could be catastrophic. Sensitive information about the Federation's military strategies, political alliances, and security measures would be compromised. The consequences were too severe to consider. "We have to stop them before they get to the archives," Zane said, his voice tight with urgency. "Have you alerted the backup teams?" "Yes, but they're not responding. We're on our own." Zane clenched his jaw. "Then we'll take care of this ourselves. Stay in communication and don't let anyone leave the area until we get control of the station." With that, Zane turned back toward the corridor where the explosion had originated. His heart pounded as he pushed his team forward. There was no time to waste. The fate of the station, and possibly the entire Federation, depended on him. As they neared the central hub, Zane could feel the temperature of the station's core systems rising. The air felt thick, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. It was as if the very walls of Lunaris 5 were alive, and they were all playing a part in the game that was unfolding. Zane's communicator buzzed again, and Lieutenant Parks's voice crackled through. "Commander, we've got a visual on one of the intruders. They're moving toward the archives. We need backup now." Zane's grip tightened around his weapon. "Hold your position. I'm on my way." He didn't wait for a response. The time for words had ended. It was time to act. Meanwhile, in Lady Corinna's quarters, Corinna paced back and forth, her mind racing. She knew something was wrong. The explosion had rattled her, but it wasn't just the noise that had her on edge. It was the feeling that she was being pulled into something much larger than herself. She had come to Lunaris 5 with a purpose, to prove herself to her father, to negotiate a mining deal that would strengthen her family's power in the galaxy. But now, in the midst of the chaos, she felt like a pawn in a game she couldn't control. The sudden sound of the door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Zane stepped inside, his face grim as he surveyed the room. His presence was commanding, even in the chaos of the station. "We need to move," Zane said without preamble. "There's been an attack. You're in danger." Corinna's golden eyes locked onto his. For the first time, she saw the seriousness in his expression, the weight of responsibility he was carrying, the facade she had put up, the arrogance, the entitlement slipped away. She didn't argue. She didn't question. Instead, she nodded silently and followed him out of the room. Zane led the way through the station, moving swiftly and with purpose. Corinna could feel the tension between them, thick and undeniable. She had pushed him, she had poked at him, and now She saw the depth of his strength. Not just physical, but something deeper. Something that made her realize just how little she knew about the world outside of her privilege. For the first time, Corinna Thorvik wasn't sure if she was in control of the situation, and that terrified her in a way she had never felt before. As they moved through the station's corridors, a sense of foreboding grew stronger. They were walking into the unknown. The only thing that was certain was that nothing would ever be the same again. The station's fate, her own and Zane's, were now inextricably linked, and Corinna wasn't sure whether that would be a blessing or a curse. Zane's boots echoed through the darkened corridors of Lunaris Fifth as he and Corinna moved swiftly through the station. The hum of the emergency systems was the only sound accompanying their hurried steps. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows that stretched along the walls, making every corner seem like a potential hiding place for the enemy. "Stay close," Zane ordered, his voice low but firm. He kept his hand near his sidearm, every instinct on high alert. The breach had been worse than anticipated. Whoever was behind this attack knew the station's layout better than most, and their aim was now clear. Take the station's control and with it the Federation's security data. If they succeeded, it would send shockwaves through the entire galaxy. Corinna, despite her usual poise, had a tight grip on her own sidearm, her eyes scanning every door, every hallway. For once, the arrogance that usually defined her demeanor had been replaced with an almost palpable tension. Zane could see it in her eyes, the same thing he felt in his gut, the fear of losing control. They reached a set of reinforced doors, the thick metal gleaming under the dim light. Zane paused, signaling to his team. He knew that whatever was beyond this threshold was going to be the heart of the conflict. "Lieutenant Parks," Zane called into his communicator. "Status report." A crackling voice came back, strained, with urgency. "Commander, we've identified the source of the breach. It's coming from the central core. They're trying to override the command protocols and gain access to the Federation archives. We've lost contact with half the team. Backup is on the way, but it'll take time." Zane's jaw tightened. Time was something they didn't have. Every second counted, and every delay meant that the attackers were getting closer to their goal. "I'm heading for the core now. Hold your position and keep me updated," Zane responded. He turned to Corinna. "Stay behind me. We don't know what we're walking into." She nodded, her jaw clenched. Zane couldn't help but notice the way she was holding herself now, differently than before. There was no more haughty air about her. Instead, she was focused, determined, and surprisingly calm. "Let's go," Zane said, pushing open the heavy doors. The corridor beyond was eerily quiet, an oppressive stillness hanging in the air. The walls seemed to close in as they moved forward, the tension growing with every step. Zane's mind raced through possible outcomes, but none of them were good. This wasn't just a simple hacking attempt. It was coordinated, calculated. Whoever was behind this had been planning for weeks, maybe months. As they moved through the darkened hallways, they suddenly heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Low, deliberate, and calculated. Zane instinctively raised his hand, signaling for his team to stop. He motioned for Corinna to stay behind him as he edged forward, his heart pounding. The shadows shifted ahead, and Zane's hand instinctively went to his blaster. He couldn't see the intruder yet, but he could feel their presence. A silent predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Corinna, surprisingly, didn't hesitate. She followed closely behind him, her sidearm drawn, her golden eyes scanning the darkness. Zane couldn't help but admire her composure. She wasn't like the aristocrats he'd encountered before. There was something different about her, something raw and real that made her far more dangerous than he'd first realized. Suddenly, the figure stepped into the dim light, masked, cloaked, and heavily armed. The figure didn't speak, didn't need to. They simply raised their weapon, aiming straight for Zane. But before they could fire, Corinna was faster. In a split second, she fired a precise shot that sent the figure reeling backward. The assailant fell to the ground, and the silence of the station returned. Zane stared at Corinna, his heart skipping a beat. She didn't seem rattled, didn't flinch. She had just saved them, and she had done it without hesitation. "I told you," she said quietly, holstering her weapon. "I wasn't always pampered." Zane didn't respond at first. His mind was still processing what had just happened. He had seen her in action, but this was different. She was resourceful, more than he had ever imagined. And it wasn't just the shot that impressed him. It was the way she'd moved, the way she hadn't thought twice about pulling the trigger to protect them both. The admiration that had been slowly growing within him shifted to something deeper, something he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He pushed it aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. There was no room for distractions now. Not with the station's fate hanging in the balance. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice a little gruffer than before. "There's more to this. If we don't get to the core in time, everything we've worked for will be lost." They continued down the hallway, the quiet tension thick between them. Zane didn't speak again, but he could feel the change in their dynamic. He could feel the shift. Something was different, and it wasn't just the fact that they were under attack. It was the connection that had silently begun to form between them, one that neither could deny. As they neared the central control room, the door suddenly slid open with a metallic groan, revealing a scene of chaos. The room was dark, the screens flickering as sparks shot from the control panels. Zane's eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for any signs of life, but it was empty. Then the voice came, a deep, distorted tone that echoed from the overhead speakers. "You're too late, Captain. The core is mine now." Zane's gut twisted. This was no ordinary attack. The voice was confident, mocking even, as if the intruder had been expecting this. He stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The voice laughed, a low, cruel sound. "I'm someone you won't defeat, Captain. I've been planning this for years." Before Zane could respond, the room shook violently, the lights flashing in rapid succession. The walls began to hum with an unnatural energy, and the control panels seemed to come alive, flickering with patterns Zane couldn't decipher. The breach had escalated. The attackers weren't just hacking. They were trying to take the core system offline entirely. Zane's pulse quickened and his mind raced. "We need to get to the main server," he said urgently to his team. "If we don't stop them now, we lose everything." But as Zane turned to Corinna, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. She was standing still, her gaze locked on the flickering screen, her golden eyes wide. Something in her expression was different, distant, almost hypnotized. "Corinna?" Zane called, his voice sharp with concern, but she didn't respond. Her body was stiff, and it was as though she hadn't even heard him. The voice in the room came again, this time mocking. "You're not the only one who's been planning, Captain. Lady Corinna has a part to play in all of this, and I think she knows exactly what I mean." Zane's heart stopped. Something wasn't right. "Corinna!" Zane shouted, moving toward her, but it was already too late. The door behind them slammed shut, and the walls began to vibrate as a new, darker force took control of the station. In that moment, Zane realized that the attack on Lunaris 5 wasn't just about power. It was about something much more personal. Corinna, it seemed, had become a part of this plan. And now, with the station on the brink of collapse, Zane had to decide, could he save the station? Or would the shadowy enemy use Corinna to bring everything down?